This is Humpbacks from the Chilliwack. You'll see humpbacks from the Chilliwack on the Mid-Coast Passage. Uncover, discover, go on an adventure. Beautiful scenery, so natural and leisurely. You'll see humpbacks from the Chilliwack on the Mid-Coast Passage. You'll see Clem-Too and the boardwalk on the Mid-Coast Passage. Kitasoo, Kekes and the Heiltsuk Nations, Ocean Falls, Namu and Bella Coola. And you'll see humpbacks from the Chilliwack on the Mid-Coast Passage. And you can kayak from the Chilliwack on the Mid-Coast Passage. Kauai, Hakai, Elko Harbor, have a hot lunch, get a wet launch, and away you'll paddle. And you'll see humpbacks from the Chilliwack on the Mid-Coast Passage. Yes, you'll see humpbacks from the Chilliwack on the Mid-Coast Passage. So I was born in Salford, England, and we emigrated to Canada when I was 8 years old by ship, the Empress of Canada. My dad couldn't find a job in Vancouver, so eventually he was offered a job in Alert Bay, had no choice, had to take it, and that was where I grew up, in Alert Bay. I was just looking for a job, and my friend said, listen, you know, the ferry pays over $6 an hour, and that's twice minimum wage, and you know, we're looking for people. So it was a bigger ferry that was coming on, and they promised me full-time work, which happened, and so that was great. So I applied for a job. I was gonna do it for about a year, but then 35 years later, I retired. Starting off as a deckhand, later on coming to the Comox to Powell River run. Later on, I put in for a job on the Central Coast as a junior officer, and worked going from Port Hardy to Bella Coola and Ocean Falls, Clem-Too. And while I was there, we were given the opportunity to try different things, going to different places and entertaining the passengers, so I was able to sing to them and have them sing with me. It was in the year of '96 in the harbor off Namu, with bold Captain Franson, his officers and crew, me boys, his officers and crew. With all that pomp and bluster behind us in the wash, the crew was feeling confident. Jolly tars the lot, me boys, jolly tars the lot. The opportunity was given to me when I was at BC Ferries. I asked if I could become a first aid trainer, and they said, go ahead, give it a try. And so I became a first aid trainer, and they said, we'd like you to instruct dangerous goods as well. So I said, okay, I'll learn about that. And forklift. All right, so I learned about forklift. got to travel all over the fleet doing these courses. Opportunities came up for training, and I spent quite a bit of time training, and that was brought me to applying for North Island College when I retired. I instruct courses in domestic vessel safety, radio, small vessel operator proficiency.
A is for Alpha, B is for Bravo, C is for Charlie as in Brown. D is for Delta, E is for Echo, F is a foxtrot in your arms. G is a game of golf, staying at a nice hotel in India. I met Juliet. We ate a kilo of lima beans, something that I'd like to forget. Mike is my friend, his birthday's in November. Oscar is my papa in Quebec. Romeo went to the Sierra Club to tango in his uniform with Victor. Whiskey is the next A, exit stands for X-ray, Yankee and Zulu are the end. So now you all can get it, it's the alphabet phonetic. Just learn this song, my friends. You are my A1, Naramata apple. You are the apple of my eye. You are a sun-ripened peach in a basket on the beach underneath the clear blue Okanagan sky. You are a bright red Bing cherry hanging high up in a tree. Your apricots are ripe and they are waiting there for me. You are my A1 Naramata apple, and we'd sure make some fine apple pie.
So my grandfather is Charlie White, and he is a well-known fisherman on the coast and has done from everything from started Czech TV to inventing the Scotty downrigger, as well as had his own fishing TV show for 10 years, about 10 years.
Yep.
And then had a couple movies on the end of it and things like that as well. But he was definitely a prolific fisherman on the coast.
And he wrote a whole bunch of books.
He literally wrote the book on how to catch salmon.
I grew up on the waterfront on Lower Island, and my dad was a keen fisherman all his life. He grew up in Pittsburgh, so not much fishing there. So he moved to the West Coast and worked for the Oregon Fish Commission. And then he got into TV. And so he moved, my mom and he came to Campbell River for their honeymoon so he could fish. And then he moved to Canada and started Czech TV, and then was a fishing guide. and then started the Undersea Gardens and Scotty Downrigger, a whole bunch of other. He was just loved fishing and being around the water, and so he catered his career to doing what he loved. So by the time I could walk, he had me out fishing with him and driving the boat. And so I was running a small boat when I was 5 and running the 36-foot family cruiser on my own when I was 12. And just passion being on the beach and fishing and water skiing and playing around on the water. I really wanted to figure out a way that I could get people to pay me for working on my own boat. And so that's where the wildlife charters and this boat came into effect.
So I moved on to the Kum-Bah-Yah when I was 22 hours old, under a day old. And I lived on the boat until I was 6 years old, full-time, and then moved on to Quadra Island, where I went to school in elementary school in Quadra and middle school, high school in Campbell River. Growing up, fishing for sure was just every dock that we would dock beside. Growing up, I would jump off the boat and instantly try and fish for shiners. And like, you know, little perch basically about this big. And I would have a little tote or a bucket and make an aquarium and catch all these fish. And that was definitely my first memory, my fishing experience for sure.
The hard part was him sitting right here, trying to do his work, and Dad, there's a fish. It's jumping right there. Come on. And I go, no. You know, it's almost I had to
do your homework first, then you can go fishing.
Chain him to the table. Remember the time in Kinkum that you it took till after dinner to get your homework done?
Well, yeah, it's because there was a huge school of ulican in the back of the boat, and there was like these halibut that were coming up from the bottom and like
Well, you didn't find that out till late because it was dark. He finally finished.
So we had the lights on in the back of the boat.
So we turned on the big lights, and then the ulicans came up, and then all of a sudden a great big halibut comes up, and he's
sits
just
on the surface, goes, sucks a bunch in, and I'm like
almost jumping off the boat trying to, you know,
trying to catch it.
Yeah. Started working the boat and do commercial type stuff in the winter. Researchers and, like I said, forestry engineers and silviculture, and then we do wildlife charters and expedition fishing in the summer. We did a dozen years worth of research with the Department of Fisheries, and so that was really cool because they paid us to go every coastal mile, every nook and cranny between about 50 miles north of Bella Bella and Desolation Sound. And so it gave me a really intimate knowledge of the coast. And then in all the different research contracts and forestry work, like I've probably lived a year up Butte Inlet with all the 10-day shifts we've done up there, and same, not as much, but Knight Inlet, Kinkum, Wakeman, Seymour, you know, Smith, Rivers, all the way up. So I've been fortunate enough to spend quite a bit of time in these remote coastal locations.
Well, it was just after we put the autopilot in the boat, right? You did the engine hours of the boat, and you figured you had hand steered the boat 2.5 times around the world just on the BC coast. At this point, we've been using the boat for remote accommodation purposes, expedition fishing charters, Department of Fisheries and Oceans work. We've done used it for film shoots as well on different productions as well. And going forward, I mean, especially as my dad is starting to get into retirement mode, it's more of a place for him to be able to continue to explore the coast in a less mental matter, maybe. Be able to do a bit more relaxed as well, but still to be able to, you know, have our foot in, especially in the industry of science on the coast and doing work for Department of Fisheries and Oceans, salmon enumeration work, as well as we could definitely see it using it more for film projects as well, to be able to host film crews in remote areas. But I mean, it kind of sees with what Dad's doing, to be honest. Yeah, I think like he's
training to, the way it's set up like a small ship, and so it isn't like, oh yeah, here's the keys, off you go, right?
No. But
it's training of, it takes weeks and well, it's taking years of being there in certain situations, and okay, if this happens, this is what you got to do, and if that happens,
This is your boat, and like, I mean, running this boat to an extent is, yes, a dream of mine, but at the same time, like, if I'm running the boat, where are you going to be? You don't want to be sitting in Campbell River. You want to be out there running this boat. So like,
oh no, I'll let you run it. I'll sit back here.
Yeah, I know how squirrely you get sitting in town. So like,
oh yeah, no, I feel lost sometimes in town. It just feels like you're trapped, right?
Yeah, as much as this is my home, this is this is our home kind of deal, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah. We've had some pretty crazy days.
We've had some crazy. I mean, I can think of. There's multiple days out there. We could think of one where we were coming by. This is my vivid memory of coming by Kelsey Bay, and again, we're talking about the tides and the winds, and one of those days where Kelsey Bay can be a bad place weather-wise, and it was tied against the wind.
It's like Cape Mudge kind of thing, tied against the wind, and the waves
stack up. And we were coming through in rock and roll. We were totally fine, but Dad had put a new toolbox in the engine room, and one of the doors wasn't latched properly on it, and so the door of the toolbox came flying open, and a tape measure came flying across the engine room and severed the oil pressure line, and spewed oil everywhere through the engine room through a tiny little pinhole. And obviously alarms went off up top here. We had to shut down the engine.
I started losing oil pressure, and that engine is married to the boat, and the boat is 1975, the engine is 1949, but it is the most dependable, quiet, fuel-efficient engine that you would ever want to have, right? So I shut it down, and it was Kai and I and his mom, and we'd been working and living on the boat for a long time. Nobody panics or anything. I'm running back. I think we got Kai on the wheel.
Yeah, I was on the wheel.
Because there's no autopilot to keep the boat going. We don't want to be broadside in those waves. And without power, we're kind of gliding to a stop. And so Leanne pulls in the Zodiac. I jump in the Zodiac, and I was getting the engine started. She's running up, setting up a tow line on the bow. And then I run up there, and before the boat even slowed down to get sideways, I was towing it with the Zodiac and getting it into Kelsey Bay. We did have a fish farm crew boat come and tow us the rest of the way in, and then we cleaned up the mess, figured out what was going on, and then just as we were leaving Kelsey Bay, a fish boat broke down in the same area, and so we went out and towed him in.
We used to use this boat as a research vessel for Department of Fisheries and Oceans, doing salmon enumeration work and coho fry surveys up and down the coast. So for years, we had our kind of finger on the pulse of what the fisheries were doing up and down the coast in these mainland inlets. We used to do that contract for how many years? It was probably
a dozen years.
About a dozen years until they ran out of funding in the mid-2000s. And so in recent years, we have been doing, we started a wild salmon count, and so we've just been up in areas in Seymour Inlet and a couple of these other remote mainland inlets. We've been doing doing
enumeration work where we snorkel and wade and count the fish. We have all the equipment from when we worked for fisheries, and so and we're up in those areas anyway. They have all kinds of people on the island. Anywhere you can drive to, they have people that can do creeks like that, but it's the remote stuff that's 90% of the battle is actually getting there with the equipment and the people that know how to do it, right? So,
Yeah, and that is for future fisheries, understanding what the habitat is the number one thing preserving salmon going forward. Is habitat, habitat, habitat. Especially back in the day when we were, Dad's talking about, back when Charlie and him used to fish for Rivers Inlet, the mentality always was, keep the biggest fish you possibly could. And over those years, has affected the gene pool. And so when you genetically select out the bigger fish constantly, you're going to have a smaller breed of fish. And so to be able to release large fish and keep those genetics back in the system, it's a good way to basically preserve those rare genetics. And that is probably one of my biggest fears, to be honest, is what will happen in the future on this coast in terms of fisheries. Just even thinking that the next generation won't be able to experience the fishing and plentifulness of the ocean that we have been so fortunate to have been a part of for these many years may not happen in a decade's time is terrifying. And so to be able to be as part as much as possible, to be able to help with as simple, just as we do the salmon enumeration work, as well as anything we can to be able to help preserve and understand the natural environment better. Because it's not something that we can look 10 years down the road and be like, oh yeah, we'll do it then. No, it's got to be done now. And also just to be able to go into those different river systems up and down the coast and being able to understand what the returns are each year going forward will help fisheries determine what the allocated fishery is going to be for recreational and commercial fisheries. So understanding how well the runs are doing is vital for understanding.
Well, and we've actually been noticing, especially with coho, that they're skinnier. They're not, the average weight has dropped, and it's probably an ocean survival issue. It's interesting, COVID, the first year of COVID, some of the best fishing we've had in 20 years.
Yep.
Fishing lodges were all closed, or most of them were closed.
Commercial fisheries were
cut way back because there was no market anymore, with the restaurants being closed. It was very noticeable. And then Mother Nature's way of kind of trying to do something about what's happening with the climate.